This post happened back in early December, and I have not stopped thinking about it ever since. But unfortunately, I didn't screenshot it, so it disappeared into the void. But luckily, this morning, I stumbled across it again. Let's talk about research and what it means for an author. My name is Taylor Rose, and welcome back to my channel where we talk about everything reading and writing. So kind of took a little break for the holidays and thought we would work our way back up with just a funny, chatty little video. We have this post here by Belle Manuel. When it was first posted, most of the posts and comments I saw were really hating on this person. Looking now, I see a lot of more positive comments, so maybe the tides have turned, and I'm sure you'll immediately guess why people were not happy about this post, right? So we have Belle here saying, gentle PSA to romance authors, do your research, y'all. I know this genre is obsessed with luxury and excess, but 1, you cannot just walk into a store and buy a Birkin. If you didn't know that, then you should be doing better research. 2, you cannot just buy big ticket items from Harry Winston. Again, this is an invitation business. You are actually barred from purchasing certain items until you've built a rapport with the company. 3, if you think brands like Coach are luxury and you've never heard of Berluti, Kiton, or Loro Piana, and I'll be honest, I haven't heard of any of these either, then you're not actually signaling wealth and it's a disservice. And now that I'm an adult, I don't really think of Coach as a luxury brand because it's not nearly as expensive as I thought it was. And like, is it still expensive? Would I ever pay full price for any of that? No. But having seen other brands out in the wild, you know, you window shop a little bit and you see a tag for like $15,000 for a little white t-shirt that doesn't even have the brand on it. Looking at Coach, you're like, oh yeah, no, that's pocket change in comparison. So like I at least understood what she meant by this point. She continues, for Audis are really not the peak car. I know Twilight threw us all off, but again, if you've not heard of Rimac or Spiker or Mazzanti, and again, I'm probably mispronouncing all of those because I haven't heard of those either. I think I heard of Spiker once and I thought it was a joke because it's Spiker with the Y. 5, Tiffany is not that luxurious. It's a mid-tier brand. You can buy anything off the shelf. If you've not heard of Graf, Van Cleef & Arpels, or Chopard, research. I've heard of Van Cleef because of those 4-leaf clover bracelets that everyone's duping. It's just getting really boring reading about the middle class while romance authors paint them up like they're wealthy. I think it really shows just how big the wealth gap is. And it really shows how little research some authors do. They hear a brand on a movie and they never look past that. It also creates a false sense of wealth. Oh, if I have Coach shoes, I'm doing well. And I find that harmful. But I'm often critiqued for how I read romance, so perhaps I'm wrong. And I mean, I kind of get it, especially in the current political climate. Like, people getting so upset that billionaires might be taxed because it's their money. Like, you are nowhere near being a billionaire. You don't even have to worry about it. They should be contributing proportionally to society. And maybe this is the childhood Catholicism coming out, but you know, the whole parable about the rich guy who gives you $50 is not better than the homeless person who gives you $1 because the dollar means more to that homeless person than the $50 or even the $50,000 would ever mean to an actually wealthy person. You know, I kind of agree with her that, so I do think it is kind of playing into harmful trends of thought. Is it maybe actually that big of a deal? No, but this is just an opinion. And Jill Duvall, author, did respond, you're not wrong, though. If authors use references that are too esoteric, their readers won't recognize them if they aren't ultra wealthy too. Which is a good point. And I think one thing to consider is that most of these billionaire romances are written from the point of view of the poorer FMC. Most of them are an average person being swept up into this life of luxury because some billionaire CEO ran into them on the street and fell in love at first sight. Stuff like that. I don't, definitely, at least the ones that I've seen, they aren't actually peers. They aren't both billionaires falling in love. So, that works to your advantage as the author. Your main character, if they are, a normal class citizen, they aren't going to know those brands. So they're going to just be like, oh my God, I looked at the price tag and it's $20,000 for a tank top or something. Like, that works in their favor, and it would open up the opportunity for these brands to be introduced to them. Like, oh, and you thought Coach was expensive? My bag's a blah, blah, blah. There's one produced a year in a tiny monastery in Italy or whatever. Like, some snobby side character can be like dropping that information for the main character to be like, oh my God, like, wow, these people really are amazingly rich, etc. And Belle Manuel responded, to a point, absolutely, but tiny details can up the level of immersion in these books. I'm not saying list the most obscure car, but lacing in details of luxury is, to me, a better way to suspend disbelief. And I totally agree. We have Morgan Cohen, who responded, I like Regency romances, and calling a character a reference throws me out with whiplash. Like, does it mean the same? More or less. Are you breaking my immersion with your world? Abso-fucking-lutely. I'll give up on authors who won't learn the basics of their universe. Yeah, I mean, that takes me out a lot too. I don't really read Regency romance, but anachronisms in world building. Like, if it's a YA book, I'm a lot more willing to forgive it because, the audience is younger. I'm currently listening to Ladies' Night, which is a YA sapphic romance, and it's supposed to be set in medieval England, but everyone speaks like a modern person, basically. Instead of saying where I would expect, they use the word apprentice. They use the word intern, which to me, those are kind of like equal in terms of like difficulty. But I'm frequently surprised by the actual like difficulty level of words. So I could be totally off. They could be very disparate in like reading level, but things like that do definitely take me out in books, especially that advertise themselves as being for adults or being like a high fantasy. Like, you're living in what is purportedly kind of like an Asian inspired secondary world that does not have a France equivalent, and you're over here with French doors. Like, I'm gonna not that's gonna pull me out. So I do think that's something to consider, though obviously the overlap between billionaires and normal people is like a razor's edge. Alex in Wonderland said, just adding, Rolex is the most well-known luxury watch brand, but it's not even close to an actual luxury watch brand. Rolex is the Audi of watch brands, something a regular person might save for as a once-in-a-lifetime purchase. Obscenely wealthy people aren't wearing a Rolex unless it's a collector's piece. Rodinea said, to the people saying it's fiction and didn't need to be accurate, do you also insist it's okay when sports authors get rules and positions wrong for sports teams? Yes. I see posts all the time, especially now that like heated rivalry has gotten so big. People being upset, like, I DNF'd this book because the hockey position was wrong, or that position doesn't do XYZ move, and how dare they? It's like, while I think there is some grace in that hockey is a lot more accessible than luxury goods, we do live with the World Wide Web, so you're able to research both of those. They continued, I also feel like there's a minimum level of research needed, and not naming brands that can be found at outlet malls, hello coach, looking at you, is the bare minimum for billionaire characters unless there's a sentimental or practical reason. I understand to a point, but I tend to expect that publicly available information like luxury brands or the rules of a sport would be correct. It's basic research. I don't need the ins and outs of a job to be fully accurate. I don't mind if they don't talk about how smelly hockey gear is, but I feel like if you want to write about a billionaire, then yeah, some introductory research is expected. To not name mid-brands, maybe I just expect too much. I don't know. I feel the same way, so we might be in the same team here. Ashley Reads Smut said, I once read a book that said they went into the back seat of a Corvette. A simple Google search of Corvette would show you that that's impossible because they are all two-seaters. Stuff like that always kills the story for me. I can only imagine what they were going into the back seat of the Corvette for. And so even if it's just a two-door vehicle, those fake back seats barely fit one person. So that would also ruin it for me. Jeannie Cool said, I quit reading a romance author who had a guy come take the FMC for her first run. A guy who runs marathons show up wearing cut off Levi's. That is really funny. Lainey T said, I don't know if it was actually well done in the Crazy Rich Asians trilogy, but it felt accurate because, yeah, the name drops were super niche / obscure. Invented for all I know, but probably real. I got the sense the author was into that stuff. It created a feel of so exclusive you'll never see it in your life, as opposed to like normal aspirational wealth. And I think that's a really good point. Anne de Levue reposted the post and added, I think this goes for all genres. It definitely pulls you out of a story when the research is done poorly, and authors should keep in mind that people from all backgrounds are reading their books. Not only do you have to think of the difference between luxury items, but the different brands by age group. A teen isn't going to want a Versace outfit, but her grandmother might. Also the style. Luxury brands have different styles by accessibility and the purchase process. And then she goes on to talk about Van Cleef needing an appointment, which I actually learned from TikTok. I mean, I'll never own one of those, but funny that a store trying to sell stuff is putting hurdles in your way. But then again, given how expensive they are, clearly the hurdles don't matter because they're doing well. And she goes on to say, it also might help if you get a beta reader who is from this background who can check your book. Same goes for authors who write characters in poverty. Research can really bring a story to light. Which, good point. I think people don't want to look at it that way because, like, versus writing, a book from the perspective of a POC as a white person, those kind of situations are seen more as like you're writing from a position of power, and how you're writing can fall into negative stereotypes or damaging, commentary or something. It is a little different because like you could think of it as like you're just the little middle class author writing about rich people. Like, who cares what rich people think? Who cares what rich people think? So like, does that count as like sensitivity reader versus, the poverty thing? I can understand why people wouldn't think it's necessary, but I do think it is important to at least do the bare minimum research for your world building. Because this is also like a conversation I've been seeing a lot around Stranger Things and how this new season's absolutely awful because everyone has like 10-minute monologues in the middle of like really stressful situations. But, a lot of people are pointing out like, oh, it's so weird. Like, Will's friends wouldn't have been okay with him being gay in the 80s, which, I mean, I agree. The 80s were apparently pretty wild. I'm still shocked Ghostbusters was so huge when that first movie had like so many like rapey jokes. But, my mom and my sister who were alive in the 80s are like, that's just how it was. So, like, yeah, Will's storyline is more about him learning to accept himself. The show isn't meant to like examine social norms at the time, which is like when you would expect to, see like that time appropriate discrimination and stuff. And so, but people's argument is, so you're totally fine believing that there's like this horrible monster dude with magical powers, but like him having nice friends isn't believable. And it's like, I personally don't think the story is the type of story asking for that kind of like deep examination on how wrong certain social norms were back then. So it's like, I personally am willing to just ignore both of those because I know it's a supernatural fantasy that's technically historical, it's not purporting itself as some sort of like documentary about the 80s. But I would be more upset about there being like actual historical inaccuracies that are affecting the plot. Like certain items not actually being sold until the 90s, that sort of thing. Editing Taylor here. So to clarify a little more, what I'm getting at basically is that like, if we're using Stranger Things as an example, it is a YA adjacent, at least, story. Obviously, I know television shows aren't categorized the same way as in books, but the story is still very much about coming of age while fighting the big bad. So, you know, personally for me, like, I don't think those types of stories they can, but they don't need to always be dealing with really sensitive topics like, oh yeah, in the 80s, people were really bad to gay people. Like, it's like, so it doesn't bother me that the story is focusing more on Will as a person and having his friends and family all, at least as of the second to last episode or whatever, being positive about him coming out. Versus if it were like a movie for adults, specifically about the problems that gay people were facing in the 80s specifically, then yeah, I would expect there to be a more realistic representation of like the general social feelings. Does that make sense? And I wouldn't classify that as a historical inaccuracy, so to speak. You know, it would be more like, you know, things that actually impact like plot events. Like, everyone's talking on walkie-talkies. Okay, what if they tried to bust out a cell phone? You know, that would be too anachronous for most people to be okay with it. Another thing a lot of people are pointing out, they just think it's weird how like all of a sudden Dustin is like genius level knowledgeable about really niche science topics when he's in the middle of high school. And a lot of people are like, you can ignore the monsters, but you can't ignore that. And it's like, okay, but the premise of the story is that what if in 80s Indiana or wherever, there was this magical monster and otherwise things are the same. Like, the story's pretty clear in establishing that, like, other than Vecna and the Upside Down and stuff, we are in 100% normal 1980s Midwest America. They're not trying to give us a speculative fiction on the parameters of what is speculative has already been pretty established, and they're not trying to also speculate what if these teenagers are randomly geniuses, you know? And like, that's an issue that I have in lots of stories, because it's clear that characters are able to do certain things at an advanced level simply to push the plot forward, not because they've actually earned that knowledge or gone through training in the story. You know, it's important to actually like give evidence of people leveling up. And whether or not you find something objectionable is, I think, almost entirely based on whether or not new concepts, new items have been introduced logically into the story and the world building, not whether or not those things actually exist in real life. Otherwise, nobody would like Harry Potter. Nobody would like Twilight. Like, if we're talking about Twilight, yeah, the story introduces vampires and werewolves of having these sets of rules and existing in this particular way. So if in the last book, all of a sudden, a unicorn busts out of nowhere, shooting rainbows out of its horn, people are going to be like, what? And then we have these commentators on the internet being like, but you believed in the magical creature of vampires, but not the magical creatures unicorns? That's a bad argument, and you know it. And Percy J, a fantasy author, also made a post about it a few days after the original post, saying, okay, maybe I'm just a dork who loves learning, because I'm seriously confused as to why people are mad about the luxury brands thread. The OP tagged author threads. It's a bit of a free education. I personally don't use a lot of brands in my contemporaries because I like to have control over my own worlds, and I don't have to worry about a certain brand becoming problematic after publishing. Also a great point. But I appreciated the thread. Do we need a group hug? I think we need a group hug. And so this was around when I first saw the post, and it was just like a constant deluge of people being like, you classist jerk, nobody cares, we just want to be taken care of. And it's like, okay, I guess. But I would fully expect, you know, Coach bags are less than $1,000. I would fully expect my billionaire boyfriend to be buying me bags at least 10K. Like, what do you mean? What do you mean? You're a billionaire and you're buying me stuff with your pocket change? Like, I don't know. I don't know. Andrea Anderson, author, responded, wait, are people mad about that thread? Even as a poor, I never took offense to it. I just giggled and scrolled on. WTF? Percy J responded, I had never heard of those brands in my life because I was the wore Payless shoes and thought Olive Garden was fancy flavor middle class grown up. Me too, girl. Even as someone currently writing a billionaire romance, I decided my rich character didn't value luxury brands, so it didn't matter anyway. Right? Good point. Another way to, if you actually don't care and actually don't want to do the research, another way for you to easily walk around it and make yourself look better. And BH Sprinkle Plot Dreamer said, yes, see, while I appreciate what they meant to say or help with, it did come off as a bit elitist. I think it's because authors don't like getting buckets of advice that detracts from their creative process, and because a lot of people don't have money, so supposedly middle-class things are luxury or wealthy stuff for a lot of people. It's a touchy subject. OP mentioned that Coach, $100 plus items weren't luxury. If it costs what could help with bills or grocery, it is a luxury. And I think, I don't know. I feel like I hear this a lot. There, as a someone who was a nail tech, I'm still licensed, but a lot of people would make this same argument about getting your nails done. Like, there are different meanings between saying something is a luxury and saying something is hashtag adjective luxury. You know, Coach is not a luxury brand, but it is a luxury to purchase any bag, any purse. Do you know what I mean? Like, you could get by carrying your stuff in a worn out old Walmart bag or one of those little canvas totes, right? Buying anything nicer than that is a luxury because it is not needed to live. It's not food, it's not water, not shelter, it's not medical care, right? So everything outside of those, you can call them a luxury noun because it's not for survival. But luxury is being used in a different way here. It has a different meaning, just like elective surgeries. In most cases, when someone uses the word elective, they are meaning it is a choice. You don't need it. You get to choose. You are electing to pick the thing. But elective surgeries, they might be something you're choosing to do. Like a nose job when you don't have any sort of breathing issues. You just don't like your nose. But many elective surgeries are still needed to keep you healthy. You need it to live. But it is not an emergent situation. You are not on the verge of dying within the next few hours if it doesn't happen. You are otherwise stable and you get to choose, or your doctor chooses, when the surgery is, right? You're not being rushed into an emergency operating room because you are the Grim Reaper's hanging over you. So it's like those are two different definitions for the same word. And like that's what's happening with luxury here. And I know, right? I know it makes me a pedant, but I'm nitpicking there. But I think it's important to understand that distinction exists with a lot of different words in order to facilitate clear communication. Because by obfuscating these distinctions, I think that you're muddying the water. And, you know, again, back to the surgery thing, usually you're muddying the water for nefarious purposes, right? Faye Mance added on into the conversation. I mean, she wasn't wrong about the Birkins not being able to just be bought at Hermes. I watch Love Luxury religiously on TikTok. I think she was just trying to give some insight into what we think is rich and what is actually rich. And Percy J said, I'm an alumna of the 2017 BeauTube era, so I actually knew about the Birkins, lol. And Always Be Booked made a good point. It seems like some authors were taking it as personal criticism of their books. Oh, and then Belle chimed in. I got dragged by some, but most seemed to realize I was just offering what I'd learned after working in the genre for years, which, yeah. And I think this conversation just kind of plays into the whole indie authors aren't real authors, their books aren't serious, blah, blah, blah. Like there are plenty of indie authors that are very serious and do write amazing work and take their job seriously and research and make sure that they're like giving the correct information and dealing with, you know, problematic topics or sensitive issues respectfully. And, you know, likewise, there are plenty who don't, who just write whatever immediately comes to mind, don't examine it, publish it, and then get mad when people are like, hey, actually, that thing you said isn't correct, or that isn't what we say in that community anymore, etc. And I think being mad when people are offering like legitimate advice on how to be more correct about certain aspects of world building, correct, or how to treat sensitive issues sensitively, might just kind of be building onto that negative reputation. Obviously, not that traditionally published books are 100% always correct. There are a lot of problematic things in them as well. But at least in those cases, I feel like the blame is a little more diffused because you know that like they had a team of people doing stuff supposedly. So it's like, yeah, I can see one person missing it, but like a whole team of people missing that really questionable thing. And it does just kind of make me laugh though, because that's one of the main reasons that I personally, again, I've never finished a book. I just daydream a lot about books that I think one day I'll write and then beat myself up over being stupid. But, you know, that is one of the reasons that I've never felt particularly drawn to contemporary fiction or even contemporary fantasy. Like, I would be too wrapped up in trying to make sure that real life details people can fact check are actually factually correct, versus writing a second world fantasy or something. I'm making up all the rules. As long as I, you know, don't do something crazy, like insist you can just walk off gangrene, there's a lot less pressure, I feel. Yeah, it's very easy to research things now, but I also think there are a lot of things that you won't know unless you go somewhere. So it's like, do I want to only write books set where I live? No. But do I notice when someone writes a book about where I live and they're wrong? Yes. It was one of those shows like Switched at Birth or Teen Mom or something where like the main character is running away to Mexico and her family tracks her down to San Antonio and they're like, oh my God, that's like an hour from the border. And we just cracked up because it's like best case scenario, you're like, Google's saying the fastest route is 2 hours and 23 minutes. But, you know, it's like that's still different than an hour. And it's like you could have easily Googled. You could have easily Googled that. We have Google Maps, MapQuest back in the early 2000s. Like, right. So it's just like things like that that pull you out. You know, I just feel like this topic kind of like snowballs into being, as a concept, more of an important topic than people. Obviously, I just shared positive responses with you here because I agree with them, but it's kind of like food safety. Yeah, does this one tiny baby step at the beginning of the process really affect that much? No, but the one time something goes wrong, you've now poisoned a whole town with listeria and people are dying. So what do you guys think? Do we need to be better at researching? I don't know. That is all for now. I will see you next time. A little tangent. We got a foster cat and she is so weird. Her owner passed away, and so she was alone in the apartment for like a month with someone coming in to feed her and stuff. And so she is like extremely high strung right now. And her birth name was Oreo, but this cat is so weird. She's still young. She's very small, but she has these like huge eyeballs and she just kind of like reacts so weirdly to our cats. We made sure she was vaccinated and stuff before she came over, but we've been calling her Creature and she is so funny. I was cracking up because she had been avoiding us. We had her locked up initially and then she was avoiding us at night when we were letting her out, and she finally came up into bed for the first time, not last night, but the night before. And I was trying so hard not to crack up because my husband was asleep and the cat came up, walked over me, got to him, and was just like stomping on this poor man. And I could see him like tossing his head, trying to avoid this cat who was like trying to rub her face on his, but he was dead asleep. Did not wake up from this. And finally he like turned over and she, you know, left because she couldn't stomp on him anymore. A lot of attitude coming out of this cat now that she's warming up to us.